Before we begin, please remember that while this presentation is thoroughly researched, I am not a medical professional. The information provided in this video is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have seen here. Picture this: you're at a holiday gathering, or maybe just a regular Sunday dinner. The conversation is flowing, everything's fine, and then someone, maybe a cousin or a friend, mentions they've been feeling really down lately, struggling to get out of bed. And almost on cue, a well-meaning relative, let's call him Uncle Dave, chimes in with, you just gotta be tougher. Shake it off. Back in my day, we didn't have time to be sad. You just gotta pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Sound familiar? That single comment, that seemingly harmless piece of old-school advice, is the tip of a colossal iceberg. An iceberg of myths and misunderstandings about mental health that is silently causing catastrophic damage across the United States. These aren't just innocent old wives' tales. They are dangerous lies that build stigma, prevent people from seeking help, and literally ruin lives. They create a world where people suffer in silence, convinced their pain is a personal failure, a character flaw, or worst of all, not even real. But what if I told you that by the end of this video, you will have a completely new framework for understanding mental health? What if you could walk away with the clarity to not only support yourself better, but to see through the fog of misinformation and truly be there for the people you care about? That's the goal here. We are going to identify, confront, and absolutely shatter the 10 most common and destructive misconceptions about mental health in America today. This isn't just about learning facts. It's about arming yourself with the truth. So let's get right into it. The single biggest, most foundational myth that underpins almost all the others. The one that's been baked into the American identity for generations. Misconception number 1. Mental health problems are a sign of weakness. This one is a giant. It's the idea that anxiety is a failure of courage, that depression is a failure of willpower, that if you were just stronger, tougher, more disciplined, you could simply think your way out of it. It's the pull yourself up by your bootstraps philosophy applied to the single most complex organ in the known universe, the human brain. And let's be honest, it's easy to see where this comes from in America. We have a culture that leonizes the rugged individual, the stoic hero who overcomes adversity through sheer grit. We celebrate relentless optimism and a can-do attitude. And while those are powerful ideals, they've created a toxic side effect: the belief that any internal struggle is a moral failing. We see vulnerability as a liability. We're taught to push through pain, not to honor it or investigate its source. So when our own mind feels like it's betraying us, our first instinct, drilled into us by our culture, is shame. We think, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just handle this? But let's apply this logic to literally any other part of the body and see how absurd it sounds. Imagine you fall and break your leg. The bone is literally snapped in two. Would anyone in their right mind come up to you and say, just be stronger, walk it off? The bone will heal if you just have a more positive attitude about it. Of course not. That's insane. We understand that a broken bone is a physical injury that requires a cast, rest, and medical attention. It has nothing to do with your character or your inner strength. Imagine your friend has asthma. When they have an asthma attack and can't breathe, do you look at them and say, you're just not trying hard enough to breathe? Come on, willpower. Inhale with more grit. No. You'd get them their inhaler because you understand that their lungs are having a biological reaction that is outside of their conscious control. So why, when the organ in question is the brain, do we throw all that logic out the window? Your brain is a physical organ. It's a 3-pound mass of tissue and electricity that runs on a delicate, intricate cocktail of chemicals like serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. It has structure. It has wiring. And just like a heart can have a valve problem, a pancreas can have trouble producing insulin, or a bone can break, your brain can have issues too. A major depressive episode isn't a bad mood you're choosing to indulge in. It can be a measurable, observable depletion of key neurotransmitters. A panic attack isn't a moment of cowardice. It's your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, hijacking your nervous system and flooding your body with adrenaline in response to a perceived, but not necessarily real, threat. Post-traumatic stress disorder isn't about living in the past. It's about a traumatic event literally altering the structure and function of your brain, creating hypervigilant neural pathways that are incredibly difficult to override. These are biological, neurological, and often genetic realities. Your genetics can predispose you to certain conditions in the exact same way they can predispose you to heart disease or diabetes. Your life experiences, especially trauma and chronic stress, can physically change your brain chemistry. To call these conditions a weakness is as scientifically illiterate as calling nearsightedness a failure of focus. This is the most important reframing you can possibly make. Seeking help for a mental health condition is not the moment you admit you are weak. It is the moment you demonstrate the ultimate strength. Think about it. Strength is not the absence of struggle. True strength is facing a monumental struggle and having the courage to say, "I can't do this alone." It's having the self-awareness to recognize that something is wrong and the fortitude to take action. It takes immense bravery to pick up the phone and make that first appointment with a therapist. It takes incredible resilience to show up, to be vulnerable, to do the hard work of untangling years of pain or harmful thought patterns. That is the opposite of weakness. That is the definition of a warrior. So the next time you hear someone, or even your own inner critic, whisper that struggling with your mental health makes you weak, I want you to replace that thought immediately. It's not weakness. It's an injury. It's a condition. It's a part of the human experience. And confronting it doesn't make you weak. It makes you one of the strongest people in the room. This fundamental shift in perspective is the first, and most crucial, step in dismantling the stigma that keeps millions of people suffering in the dark. Because when we stop seeing it as a character flaw, we can finally start treating it for what it is. A health issue that deserves the same compassion, care, and medical attention as any other. And this leads us directly to the second, and perhaps one of the most dangerous misconceptions we have in America, the idea that mental health problems are something that happens to other people. That they're rare, isolated incidents affecting a small, troubled fraction of the population. You might not say it out loud, but maybe you feel it. You see a story on the news, you hear a statistic, and you think, "That's terrible, but it's not my world. It's not my family, my friends, my neighborhood." It's a comforting thought, isn't it? It allows us to build a wall between us and them. It allows us to believe that mental illness is a dramatic cinematic event, the stuff of movies, not the stuff of our mundane, everyday lives. We picture a specific type of person, someone visibly broken, someone on the fringes. We don't picture the high school quarterback, the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, the smiling mom in the PTA, or the guy sitting next to you at the bar watching the game. And because of this flawed picture in our heads, we fundamentally misunderstand the scale of what we're facing. So let's tear down that wall with some cold, hard facts. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, nearly 1 in 5 U.S. adults live with a mental illness. That's over 57 million people. Let that number sink in. That's more than the entire populations of Texas and Florida combined. It's not a fringe group. It's not a small minority. It's a massive portion of our country. And when we talk about any mental illness in a given year, the numbers are even more staggering. Think about it this way: the next time you're in a room with 4 other people, at work, at a family dinner, in a coffee shop, the odds are that at least one of you is currently struggling with a mental health condition. It might be anxiety, depression, PTSD, an eating disorder, bipolar disorder, anything. 1 in 5. It's not them. It's us. And for those who think, okay, but that's probably just mild stress, let's go a level deeper. 1 in 24 adults in America lives with a serious mental illness, something like major depressive disorder, schizophrenia, or severe bipolar disorder. These are conditions that substantially interfere with or limit one or more major life activities. 1 in 24. That's your kid's classroom. That's your weekly poker game. That's the line at the grocery store. It is everywhere. The problem is, it's invisible. Let me tell you about a guy we'll call David. To everyone who knew him, David was the definition of success. He was a partner at his law firm by 35, had a beautiful house in the suburbs, a loving wife, 2 great kids who were stars on their soccer teams. He coached on the weekends. He ran marathons. He was the guy everyone went to for advice, the rock, the one who always had it all together. On his Facebook page, it was all smiles, family vacations to Disney World, anniversary dinners, proud posts about his kids' honor roll. But what people didn't see was David, sitting in his pristine BMW in the office parking garage every morning, unable to breathe. They didn't see the crushing weight on his chest, the panic attacks that came out of nowhere, convincing him he was having a heart attack. They didn't see him staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., his mind racing with catastrophic what-if scenarios. What if he lost a big case? What if his kids got sick? What if he wasn't good enough? What if everyone found out he was a fraud? He was living in a state of constant high-alert dread. He was suffering from a severe, undiagnosed anxiety disorder and major depression. But how could he tell anyone? He was the rock. He was the one who was supposed to be strong. Admitting he was drowning felt like a bigger failure than anything his anxious mind could ever conjure. So he smiled for the photos, he closed the big deals at work, and he slowly, quietly fell apart on the inside. David's story isn't unique. It is the story of millions of Americans who are what we call high-functioning. They are masters of disguise. They hold down jobs, they raise families, they contribute to their communities, all while fighting a brutal, internal war every single day. They are terrified that if the mask slips, even for a second, their entire world will collapse. This is the reality of mental illness in America. It doesn't have a specific look. It doesn't wear a sign. It looks like your boss, your doctor, your mailman, your sister. It looks like the person who seems to have it all. And this misconception isn't just limited to anxiety and depression. Think about the college student who is the life of the party, always surrounded by friends, but who secretly battles a debilitating eating disorder, obsessed with every calorie and every reflection in the mirror. Think about the new mother, posting beautiful filtered photos of her baby, while she privately struggles with postpartum depression so severe she feels a terrifying numbness and disconnection from the child she's supposed to adore. Think about the decorated military veteran who can command a room and tell hilarious stories, but who flinches at every loud noise and spends his nights battling the horrifying flashbacks of PTSD. The truth is, mental illness does not discriminate. It doesn't care how much money you have in the bank, what your job title is, what color your skin is, or how perfect your life looks on Instagram. It is an equal opportunity affliction. It cuts across every demographic, every socioeconomic status, and every corner of this country. And here's the final crucial piece of this puzzle. Even if you are, by some statistical miracle, not one of the 1 in 5 who will experience a mental health condition this year, the simple math of it all means you absolutely know and love someone who is. It's not a question of if, it's a question of who. It could be your parent dealing with the isolating depression that often comes with aging. It could be your child, navigating the intense social pressures of school with crippling anxiety. It could be your best friend, your spouse, your neighbor. The ripple effect is immense. When one person struggles, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It impacts their family, their friendships, their workplace. The idea that mental illness is a niche issue, a problem for other people, isn't just statistically false. It's a profound failure of empathy and imagination. It's a lie we tell ourselves so we don't have to look too closely at our own communities, our own families, and maybe even ourselves. So, the next time you think this isn't your problem, remember David in his car. Remember the 1 in 5. Look around you. The people who need our understanding are not strangers. They are not them. They are us. And recognizing this fact, truly internalizing it, is the first step to dismantling the stigma. It forces us to ask a different question. Not why is this happening to them, but what can I do to help the people right here next to me? Because the fight for mental health isn't on some distant battlefield. It's in our homes, our schools, and our offices. And it's a fight that involves every single one of us. This brings us to another deeply ingrained myth. One that adds a layer of guilt and blame on top of the suffering. And that myth is the belief that mental illness is a character flaw, a sign of personal weakness. The quiet, insidious whisper that says if you were just stronger, more disciplined, or had more willpower, you could simply snap out of it. This is perhaps one of the most damaging misconceptions of all, because it turns a health crisis into a moral failing. It takes the pain of the condition itself and layers it with the unbearable weight of shame. Think about it. We would never tell someone with a compound fracture to just try harder to walk. We wouldn't tell someone with diabetes to just will their blood sugar to be normal. We understand these are physiological conditions that require medical intervention, rest, and support. Yet, when the organ in question is the brain, this logic is thrown out the window. Suddenly, it's a matter of grit, a test of character. Let me tell you about Mark. To everyone who knew him, Mark was the definition of strength. He was a former college athlete, a successful project manager at a demanding tech firm, the guy who ran marathons on weekends and was always the first to help a friend move a couch. He was the rock. Inside, however, a different story was unfolding. It started subtly. A persistent knot of anxiety in his stomach before big presentations, something he used to thrive on. Then came the sleepless nights, his mind racing through worst-case scenarios, replaying every minor mistake from the day. He started losing interest in things he loved. A weekend run felt like climbing a mountain. Dinners with friends felt like a performance. He told himself what so many of us do. I'm just stressed. I need to push through it. I'm tougher than this. He saw his struggle not as a symptom, but as a personal failure, weakness. So he doubled down. He started getting to the office earlier, staying later. He forced himself to the gym even when he was exhausted. He was trying to outrun his own mind, convinced that if he just applied more effort, more discipline, he could beat it. But it was like trying to hold back the tide with a bucket. The more he fought it with brute force, the more ground he lost. His focus at work shattered. He became irritable and distant with his family. The rock was crumbling from the inside out. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. He was sitting in his car in the office parking garage, unable to get out. His heart was pounding, his hands were trembling, and he couldn't catch his breath. He wasn't thinking about the big project deadline. He was just consumed by a tidal wave of panic and despair. In that moment, staring at the concrete wall, he finally realized this wasn't a lack of willpower. This wasn't a character flaw. He was sick, and trying to power through it was like trying to fix a broken engine by pressing harder on the gas. The idea that mental illness is a failure of character isn't just wrong. It's scientifically illiterate. Our brains are incredibly complex biological organs. They run on a delicate and intricate soup of chemicals, neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. These aren't just abstract concepts. They are the physical messengers that regulate our mood, our sleep, our focus, our motivation. When the signaling in this system goes awry, whether due to genetics, chronic stress, or trauma, the result is not a weak personality. The result is a legitimate, diagnosable medical condition. Genetics play a huge role. Research has shown that conditions like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and major depression have strong hereditary links. You are simply more likely to develop a condition if it runs in your family, in the same way you might be predisposed to heart disease. It has nothing to do with how tough you are. Then there's your environment. Prolonged exposure to stress, for example, can physically change your brain. The stress hormone cortisol, when released continuously, can damage neural circuits in the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex, areas of the brain critical for memory and executive function. Trauma, especially in childhood, can fundamentally alter brain development, creating a vulnerability to conditions like PTSD, anxiety, and depression later in life. Are these the results of a weak character? Or are they the predictable biological consequences of an organ being subjected to overwhelming and damaging circumstances? Mark's story didn't end in that parking garage. The strongest thing he ever did wasn't running a marathon or closing a big deal. It was picking up his phone and making an appointment with a therapist. It was walking into that office and admitting for the first time, "I'm not okay and I need help." It took more courage than anything he had ever done before. He learned that he had generalized anxiety disorder and depression. It wasn't a verdict on his character, it was a diagnosis. And with a diagnosis came a plan, therapy, lifestyle changes, and for a time medication to help rebalance his brain chemistry. He was learning to treat his mind with the same respect he would treat a broken bone. This is why we have to fundamentally redefine our concept of strength. True strength isn't the absence of struggle. It's not pretending you're invincible. True strength is the courage to be vulnerable. It's the resilience to face a challenge, especially one that is invisible to everyone else. It's the grit it takes to get out of bed when depression is screaming at you to stay down. It's the bravery to walk into a therapist's office, to talk about your deepest fears, to do the hard work of healing. That is an act of profound strength. By clinging to this outdated myth of mental weakness, we create a culture of silence. We force people like Mark to suffer alone, to believe their pain is their own fault. We discourage them from seeking the very help that could save their lives. Every time we tell someone to cheer up or get over it, we are reinforcing this harmful lie. We are placing a barrier between a person in need and the care they deserve. The truth is, mental illness does not discriminate. It affects a CEO in the same way it affects a construction worker. It affects soldiers and teachers, athletes and artists. It is a part of the human condition, and acknowledging its biological reality is the first step toward dismantling the shame that surrounds it. It allows us to move from judgment to compassion, from blame to support. It allows us to see the person, not just the illness, and to recognize the incredible fortitude it takes to navigate a world that still doesn't fully understand. But this shift in understanding, from seeing mental illness as a personal failing to a health condition, raises a whole new set of questions and, unfortunately, a new set of myths. Once a person finds the courage to seek help, what does that help actually look like? What really happens behind the closed door of a therapist's office? This leads us directly into our next common misconception, one that trivializes the very process of recovery. The idea that therapy is just paying someone to listen to you complain. It's an image we've all seen 1,000 times in movies and on TV. A person lying on a plush couch, staring at the ceiling, rambling on about their week while a therapist in a tweed jacket nods thoughtfully, occasionally jotting something down on a notepad. From the outside, it looks passive. It looks like a one-sided conversation. It looks, to be frank, like you're just renting a very expensive, very quiet friend. And if that's all it was, the skeptics would be right. It would be a colossal waste of time and money. But that image, that popular caricature, is as accurate a depiction of therapy as a child's drawing of a rocket is to the actual blueprints for a Falcon 9. It captures a tiny piece of the shape but misses the entire universe of complexity, science, and intentionality that makes it work. To understand what's really happening, let's use an analogy. Imagine you want to get physically strong. You could go to the gym by yourself. You could lift some weights, run on the treadmill, and you might see some progress. But now, imagine you hire an elite personal trainer. You're not paying them to just stand there and watch you sweat. You're not paying them to say good job after every rep. You are paying for their expertise. You're paying them to analyze your form, to see the subtle ways your back is arching when you squat, something you could never see on your own. You're paying them to know when to push you harder and when to tell you to stop, preventing injury. You're paying them to design a structured program, targeting specific muscle groups in a specific order to achieve a specific goal. They are an expert guide for a complex biological system. A therapist is a personal trainer for your mind. You aren't just complaining. You are providing data. Every story you tell, every frustration you vent, every memory you share. It's all data for a highly trained professional who is actively listening on multiple levels. They aren't just hearing the words. They're listening for the patterns between the words. They're listening for the cognitive distortions, the self-limiting beliefs, the unresolved emotional wounds that are running like faulty code in the background of your life, causing the same problems to happen over and over again. A friend with the best intentions in the world will listen and say, "Oh, that's terrible. Your boss is such a jerk." A therapist will listen and might ask, "I've noticed that this feeling of being unfairly criticized by an authority figure has come up before when you talked about your father and your old college professor. Can we explore that connection?" A friend gives you sympathy. A therapist helps you find the source code of the problem, and then they help you rewrite it. This is the work of therapy. It's not just talking. It's structured, evidence-based intervention. Let's take one of the most common forms, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. The core idea of CBT is that our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are all interconnected. A lot of our suffering comes from automatic, distorted ways of thinking. For example, you make a small mistake at work. Your automatic thought might be, "I'm a complete idiot. I'm going to get fired." That thought produces a feeling of intense anxiety and shame. That feeling then causes a behavior. You avoid your boss for the rest of the day, and you're too scared to innovate on your next project. It's a vicious cycle. In therapy, you don't just complain about the anxiety. The therapist gives you the tools to break the cycle. They'll guide you to actually examine that thought. "I'm a complete idiot." They'll ask you to become a detective. What's the evidence for that thought? What's the evidence against it? Have you ever done anything competent at your job? What's a more realistic, balanced way to look at this situation? Maybe a more balanced thought is, "I made a mistake, which is human. I can learn from it and fix it. It doesn't define my entire worth as an employee." Do you see the difference? It's not about getting a pep talk. It's a rigorous, methodical process of learning how to think differently. It's mental weight training. It's difficult, it requires effort, and it's a skill you build over time. The therapist is your coach, teaching you the proper form. Let's consider a real-world composite of what this looks like. A man we'll call David came to therapy because of what he described as crippling social anxiety. He thought he would just be talking about how much he hated parties and how scared he was to speak up in meetings. He figured the therapist would just nod and tell him he was fine. But that's not what happened. His therapist identified that David's core fear was judgment. So they didn't just talk about it, they built a plan. First, they worked on identifying the specific catastrophic thoughts he had. "If I say something stupid, everyone will laugh at me, and I'll be humiliated forever." Then, they systematically dismantled that thought just like we described. But then they moved on to the behavioral part of therapy. They created a hierarchy of fears, from least scary to most scary. At the bottom was simply making eye contact with the cashier and saying, "Thank you." For weeks, that was David's only homework. Once he mastered that, the next step was asking a stranger for the time. Then it was making a small comment about the weather to someone in an elevator. Each step was a small manageable victory. They were building a ladder, rung by rung, out of the pit of his anxiety. Eventually, they role-played entire conversations in the safety of the therapy room, with the therapist pretending to be a colleague or a stranger at a party, giving David a safe place to practice. He wasn't paying his therapist to be a friend. A friend would have said, "Just be yourself. Go to the party, you'll be fine." That's like telling someone who can't swim to just jump in the deep end. David was paying his therapist to be an expert architect and engineer, to design a bridge that could safely carry him from a place of isolation to a place of connection. He was paying for a strategy, for tools, and for a safe, controlled environment in which to build his skills. This is why the therapeutic relationship is fundamentally different from a friendship. It is professional and bound by strict ethical codes of confidentiality. It is entirely one-sided by design. The focus is 100% on you, without the need for the reciprocity that defines a friendship. You don't have to worry about burdening your therapist or what they're going through. That freedom allows for a level of honesty and vulnerability that is often impossible to achieve, even with those we love the most. You're not paying for their friendship. You're paying for their undivided, professional, objective focus. So therapy isn't a passive act of complaining. It is an active, collaborative process of exploration, skill building, and profound change. It's where you go to not just talk about the storm, but to learn how to build a stronger ship and navigate the seas more effectively. The therapist is the master navigator with the maps and the expertise, but make no mistake, you are the one at the helm doing the hard work of turning the wheel. So if therapy is the software update for our minds, a complex process of rewriting code and building new skills, what about the hardware? What about the brain itself? This brings us to one of the most controversial and misunderstood topics in all of mental health, one that often gets painted with a single terrifying brushstroke: psychiatric medication. For many, those two words conjure images of oversedated patients in old black and white films, of chemical straitjackets that dull the mind and steal the soul. It's a topic that lives in the extremes. On one side, you have the cynics, convinced it's all a big pharma conspiracy to numb the population and turn a profit. On the other, you have the evangelists who see it as a miracle cure for all of life's problems. The debate is loud, it's angry, and it's deeply personal. And right in the middle of that battlefield stands our fifth major misconception: that taking medication for your mental health is a crutch, an easy way out, or worst of all, a sign of profound personal weakness. This belief is woven deep into the fabric of the American identity. We are the nation of the self-made, the rugged individualist who pulls themselves up by their own bootstraps. We fix our own problems. We tough it out. So, the idea of taking a pill to manage our thoughts or feelings can feel like cheating, can feel like admitting defeat. It's admitting that our own willpower, our own character, isn't strong enough. But this entire framework is built on a fundamental misunderstanding of what the brain is and what these medications actually do. Let's go back to our hardware and software analogy. Therapy, mindfulness, building coping skills, that's all upgrading your software. It's incredibly important. But what happens when the hardware itself has a fault? The brain is not some magical, ethereal entity separate from the rest of our body. It is a physical organ. It is a 3-pound universe of intricate wiring and complex chemistry. And just like any other organ, it can run into trouble. Your pancreas can struggle to produce insulin. Your thyroid can produce too little hormone. Your heart can have an irregular rhythm. In those cases, we don't call the medicine a crutch. We call it medicine. We don't tell a diabetic that taking insulin is the easy way out. We don't tell someone with high blood pressure that their medication is a sign of weak character. We understand it's a tool to correct a biological, chemical imbalance. So why do we treat the brain any differently? Conditions like major depression, generalized anxiety disorder, or bipolar disorder are not just bad moods or a negative mindset. They have observable, physiological roots. Think of your brain as a massive, bustling city. For this city to function, messages have to be sent constantly between different districts: the district for mood, for sleep, for appetite, for motivation. These messages are carried by chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. You've probably heard of them: serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. In a brain experiencing clinical depression, this communication network is breaking down. Maybe the city isn't producing enough messengers. Or maybe the messengers are being recalled back to their home base too quickly, before their message can be fully received. It's like a citywide mail service where half the letters are getting lost or thrown out before they reach their destination. The result is chaos. The mood district shuts down. The motivation district goes dark. Now, what does an antidepressant like an SSRI actually do? It doesn't magically pour a bucket of happiness into your brain. It doesn't write new code for your personality. It acts more like a traffic cop or a gatekeeper. An SSRI, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, steps into the gap between neurons and essentially tells the serotonin messengers, hey, hang out here a little longer. Make sure your message gets delivered before you go home. It inhibits the reuptake, the process of recalling the messenger. It's not creating a new feeling. It's allowing the brain's own natural system for regulating mood to do its job properly. It's repairing the faulty communication line. It's fixing the hardware so the software has a chance to run. This brings us back to the crutch argument. Is it a crutch? Absolutely. In the exact same way that glasses are a crutch for someone who can't see clearly. Glasses don't see for you. They correct a physical issue with your eyes so that you can see the world. Medication doesn't live your life for you. It corrects a chemical issue in your brain so that you can live your life. It is not the easy way out. In fact, for many, it's the only way in. It's the way into being able to engage with therapy. It's the way into having enough energy to exercise or eat a healthy meal. It's the way into being present enough to mend a broken relationship. Medication doesn't solve your problems. What it can do is lift the crushing, suffocating weight of depression just enough so that you can stand up and start fighting back. It can quiet the deafening, static-filled scream of anxiety, just enough so that you can hear your therapist's guidance. It's not the finish line. For so many people, it is simply the key that unlocks the starting gate. You still have to run the race. And what about that other great fear? That medication will change you, that it will sand down your personality and turn you into a numb, emotionless zombie. This is a valid fear, born from stories of overmedication or incorrect prescriptions. And it's true that finding the right medication and the right dose is a delicate process, a partnership between you and a medical professional. It's not one size fits all. But the goal of modern psychiatry is the exact opposite of zombification. The goal is to make you more yourself. Think about it. When you are so depressed that you can't enjoy the things you once loved, when you've lost your sense of humor, your passion, your connection to others, is that truly you? When you are so consumed by anxiety that you can't leave your house or speak up in a meeting, is that your authentic self? No, that is the disease. The disease is what's stealing your personality. The medication's job is to fight the disease, to clear away the fog, to silence the static so that the real you, the you that's been buried underneath it all, can finally come back out into the sun. I knew a woman once, a brilliant artist. Her world was color and light, but a severe depression descended on her. And it was like the color saturation of her entire life was turned down to zero. Food was tasteless. Music was just noise. Her passion for painting, the very core of her identity, vanished. She felt hollow. She was terrified of medication, convinced it would destroy what little creativity she had left. But finally, in desperation, she worked with a psychiatrist and started a low dose of an antidepressant. The first month, not much happened, but then slowly things began to shift. It wasn't a sudden dramatic explosion of joy. It was quieter. One morning she was drinking coffee and she noticed, truly noticed, the way the morning light was hitting the dust motes dancing in the air. It was beautiful. A week later, she found herself humming along to a song on the radio. And then one afternoon, without thinking, she picked up a sketchbook and drew the face of a stranger she saw on the bus. The medication hadn't given her a personality. It gave her back her own. It didn't create art for her. It just unlocked the door to the studio that depression had boarded shut. It was the tool that allowed her to once again be the artist she always was. So no, medication is not a moral failing. It is not a shortcut. It is a medical intervention for a medical problem. It's a testament not to weakness, but to the courage it takes to seek help, to use every tool available, and to fight for the right to be yourself. It's acknowledging that your brain is a part of your body, and it deserves the same care and compassion as any other part. But this focus on biology and trauma brings up another critical point. If mental health struggles are often rooted in these profound biological issues or major life events, does that mean they're only a concern for a select few? Does that mean the rest of us, the ones without a diagnosed disorder or a capital T trauma in our past, are in the clear? This leads us directly to the assumption that mental health care is an emergency room, a place you only go when something is horribly, dramatically broken. And that brings us to misconception number 6. Therapy is only for people in crisis. Think about your car for a second. Do you only take it to the mechanic when the engine has seized, smoke is billowing from the hood, and you're stranded on the side of the highway? Or do you take it in for regular oil changes, tire rotations, and checkups? You do the preventative maintenance, right? Because you know that a 10-minute $60 oil change today prevents a 10-day $6,000 engine replacement down the road. You do it to keep the car running smoothly, efficiently, and to extend its life. So why, when it comes to the single most complex and important machine we will ever operate, our own mind, do we so often wait for the catastrophic breakdown? This belief that therapy is an emergency room for the mind is one of the most damaging misconceptions out there, because it stops people from accessing one of the most powerful tools for growth and fulfillment that exists. It frames therapy as a last resort, a place for the broken, a signal that you've failed. But that's like saying going to the gym is a sign your body has failed. It's the complete opposite. Therapy isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about tuning what works. It's about upgrading your operating system. It's for the person who has a good job but feels a nagging sense of unfulfillment and can't figure out why. It's for the couple who doesn't fight much but feels a growing distance between them, a loss of the spark they once had. It's for the new parent who loves their child more than anything but is struggling with the total loss of their old identity. It's for the student about to graduate, terrified of making the wrong choice in a world of infinite options. None of these people are in a 5-alarm crisis. They aren't at rock bottom. They are simply navigating the profoundly complex and often confusing business of being a human. They are dealing with life transitions, existential questions, and the desire to understand themselves on a deeper level. To them, therapy isn't a hospital. It's a workshop. It's a design studio for your own life. Let me tell you about someone we'll call Sarah. Sarah was, by all external measures, incredibly successful. She was a senior marketing manager at a tech company. She ran marathons on the weekends, had a great group of friends, and a stable long-term relationship. She had no history of trauma, no diagnosed anxiety or depression. But for about a year she'd been feeling flat. The promotions didn't bring the joy they used to. The marathon training felt more like a chore than a passion. Conversations with her partner felt routine. There was just a low-grade hum of dissatisfaction under the surface of her perfect-looking life. Her friends told her she had nothing to complain about. "You have it so good," they'd say. "Just be grateful." And she felt guilty because they were right. So she pushed the feeling down. But it didn't go away. It just got quieter and heavier. Finally, she decided to try therapy, feeling like a complete imposter. She told her therapist in the first session, "I feel like I'm wasting your time. There are people with real problems and I'm just meh." The therapist smiled and said something that changed her entire perspective. "You don't need to be drowning to learn how to swim better." Over the next 6 months, Sarah didn't uncover some deeply repressed trauma. There was no dramatic Hollywood breakthrough. Instead, she and her therapist did the slow, steady work of untangling the shoulds from the wants. They examined the values she thought she held versus the values her actions actually reflected. She realized she'd spent a decade climbing a corporate ladder she didn't even want to be on, because that's what she thought a successful person should do. She realized her relationship had become comfortable but complacent, because they'd stopped asking each other big questions. Therapy gave her a dedicated space, 1 hour a week just for her, to be completely honest without fear of judgment. It was a place to put words to the vague feelings she'd been ignoring. It wasn't a place to fix a crisis. It was a place to gain clarity. She ended up making changes, not drastic ones. She didn't quit her job and move to Bali, but she did delegate more at work to create space for a passion project she'd put off for years, mentoring young women entering the tech field. It turned out that a sense of purpose, not another promotion, was what she was craving. She and her partner started a weekly no phones, big questions date night, and rediscovered the curiosity they had for each other at the beginning. Sarah didn't go to therapy because her life was broken. She went because she wanted her life to feel as good on the inside as it looked on the outside. She used it as preventative maintenance, and in doing so, she likely swerved away from a future of genuine burnout, a potential breakup, and a full-blown midlife crisis. This is the hidden power of therapy that we rarely talk about. It's a tool for self-awareness. It's a confidential sounding board. It's a place to learn new communication skills, boundary-setting techniques, and emotional regulation strategies that benefit literally every single person on the planet, regardless of their mental state. You can go to therapy to figure out how to ask for a raise. You can go to therapy to process your complicated feelings about a family member. You can go to therapy because you have a recurring thought pattern you'd like to change, or a habit you'd like to break. You can go because you want to be a better partner, a more patient parent, or a more authentic version of yourself. This is not a luxury. In the high-pressure, constantly connected, comparison-driven world we live in, having a dedicated space to process your own experience is becoming a fundamental necessity for a well-lived life. And let's address a common concern here. The idea that by going to therapy for smaller issues, you're taking a spot from someone who really needs it. This comes from a good place, but it's based on a scarcity mindset that just isn't accurate. First, the mental health field is growing to meet demand. Second, and more importantly, by addressing your stress, your communication issues, or your feelings of listlessness now, you are actively preventing a bigger crisis later. You are being proactive, not reactive. In a way, you're lessening the future burden on the emergency side of the system. It's like getting a flu shot. You're not just protecting yourself, you're contributing to the overall health of the community. So let's reframe this. Let's stop seeing therapy as an emergency room and start seeing it as a gym for the mind. It's a place you go to build strength, flexibility, and resilience. Sometimes you go to rehab an injury, yes, but most of the time you go to stay healthy, to get stronger, to push your own limits, and to improve your overall performance in the game of life. You don't have to be sick to want to be stronger, but even when we accept that therapy can be a tool for growth, there's often another, deeper barrier that stops us from picking up the phone. It's a stubborn, all-American idea that's been baked into the very fabric of our culture. It's the belief that no matter the problem, big or small, you should be able to figure it out on your own. That relying on someone else for this kind of help is a fundamental failure of character. This leads us right into the heart of our next major misconception: that therapy is just for the weak, or the truly crazy. That it's an expensive, self-indulgent habit for people who don't have real problems, who just need to pay someone to listen to them complain. This is one of the most pervasive and, frankly, one of the most damaging misconceptions in the entire landscape of American mental health. It's the idea that therapy is, at its core, a glorified, high-priced conversation, a rental friend. Let's be honest, many of us have had this thought. You picture it. You on a leather couch talking about your childhood while a therapist in a tweed jacket nods sagely and occasionally asks, "And how does that make you feel?" before charging you $200 for the hour. Feels flimsy, unproductive, especially for a culture built on action, on doing, on fixing things with our own two hands. We think, what's talking going to solve? I have real-world problems. I need real-world solutions, not just feelings. I want to tell you about a guy named David. David was the quintessential American success story. He'd built a successful contracting business from the ground up. He worked 12-hour days, managed a dozen employees, and could solve any logistical nightmare you threw at him. A shipment of lumber delayed? He'd find another supplier in an hour. A client changes the blueprint last minute? He'd stay up all night redrawing the plans. He was a fixer, a problem solver. But at home things were falling apart. He was short-tempered with his wife, distant from his kids. He felt this constant, low-grade hum of anxiety under his skin, a pressure in his chest that never seemed to go away. He was sleeping maybe 4 hours a night, waking up with his jaw clenched, his mind already racing through the day's checklist. His wife finally begged him to see someone. His reaction was exactly what you'd expect. A shrink? What for? I'm not crazy. I'm just stressed. It's the business. He saw it as the ultimate admission of defeat. He, David, the guy who could fix anything, couldn't fix his own head? No way. He told her, "I'm not paying some guy $250 an hour to tell me to take a bubble bath and think happy thoughts. It's a scam." But things got worse, and eventually, faced with an ultimatum, he went. He walked into that first session with his arms crossed, cynical, ready to debunk the whole charade. And for the first 20 minutes he felt completely justified. He talked about his stress, the business, the pressure. The therapist just listened. David was thinking, yep, here we go. I'm paying for a human wall to bounce words off of. But then the therapist did something he didn't expect. She didn't offer a platitude. She didn't tell him to relax. She asked a simple question. She said, "David, you've described yourself as a problem solver. It's clearly a core part of your identity. When you were a kid, who in your family was the problem solver? David paused. It was a weird question. He thought about it and said, "Nobody really. My dad worked all the time, my mom was always overwhelmed. If something broke or if there was a fight, I was the one who had to step in and fix it. Smooth things over. Make sure everyone was okay." The therapist nodded. So, from a very young age, you learned that your role in the family, was to be the one who handled the problems. Your job was to absorb the stress so others didn't have to. And in that moment for David, a light didn't just go on. A floodlight illuminated a room in his mind he didn't even know existed. He wasn't just stressed. He was running a pattern, a deep subconscious program written in his childhood that said, "I must fix everything. I must carry all the weight. Showing vulnerability is not an option. If I am not solving a problem, I am worthless." His business wasn't the source of his anxiety. It was just the latest and greatest stage for this lifelong pattern to play out. That is the difference between talking to a friend and engaging in therapy. A friend with the best intentions would have heard David's story and said, "Man, that sucks. You should really take a vacation." A friend listens to the story. A therapist is trained to listen for the structure. They're not just a passive audience. They are an active, trained professional, skilled in identifying the cognitive patterns, the underlying beliefs, and the behavioral loops that keep us stuck. Therapy isn't just talking. It's a range of evidence-based, scientifically validated modalities. Think of something like cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT. This isn't about endlessly dredging up the past. CBT is intensely practical. It operates on a simple, powerful premise. It's not the events in our lives that cause our suffering, but our interpretation of those events. It's the story we tell ourselves. A CBT therapist is like a master editor for that story. They give you the tools to identify a destructive thought pattern as it's happening, like David's thought. "If I'm not working, I'm failing." And help you challenge it, reframe it, and build a new, more realistic and healthier neural pathway. It's not magic, it's mental mechanics. It's learning how your own brain operates and how to become a better driver instead of just a passenger. And this brings us to the second half of the misconception, that this kind of work is only for people with severe, capital letter mental illnesses. Schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder. We have this image that you only go to therapy if you've hit absolute rock bottom, if you're non-functional. Let's apply that logic to physical health. Would you say that you should only go to a doctor if you're having a heart attack? That seeing a dentist is only for people whose teeth are actively falling out? Of course not. It's absurd. We go to the doctor for checkups, for a sprained ankle, for persistent allergies. We hire a personal trainer to get stronger, improve our performance, and prevent injury. We see a physical therapist to recover from surgery and regain function. Therapy is all of those things for your mind. You don't have to be in a full-blown crisis to benefit from it. People go to therapy to navigate a difficult life transition, like a new job, a move, or becoming a parent. They go to learn better communication skills to improve their marriage. They go to process grief after losing a loved one. They go to work through a creative block or to build self-confidence before a big presentation. They go because they just feel stuck. They have a sense that they could be living a fuller, more connected life, but something is holding them back, and they can't quite put their finger on what it is. Thinking therapy is only for the severely ill is like thinking the gym is only for professional bodybuilders. In reality, it's a place for anyone who wants to improve their health, build strength, and increase their resilience. Therapy is mental fitness. It's preventative maintenance. It's performance coaching for your life. It is the courageous act of deciding that you are worth the investment. It's acknowledging that your internal world, your thoughts, your emotions, your patterns, is just as real and just as important as your external world, and that it deserves the same level of care, attention, and professional expertise. It's not a sign of weakness. It's one of the greatest signs of strength. It's having the wisdom to know that you don't have to fix everything on your own. But this brings us to one of the most pervasive and damaging misconceptions of all. It's a quiet one. A subtle assumption that poisons the well of empathy and understanding. It's the belief that mental illness discriminates, that it's a condition reserved for certain kinds of people. You know, the stereotype. The person who is visibly struggling, who doesn't have their life together, who comes from a broken home. We create these neat little boxes in our minds, categories for who is and who is not susceptible to the struggles of the mind. We tell ourselves a story that success, wealth, a loving family, or a strong exterior acts as some kind of magical shield. This is misconception number 8, that mental health problems only happen to other people, not to the ones who seem to have it all. This lie is the bedrock of stigma, because if we believe that only certain people get sick, then when it happens to us or to someone we admire, we are thrown into a state of confusion and shame. We think, this can't be happening to me. I'm strong. I'm successful. I have a good life. There must be something uniquely and fundamentally wrong with me. This belief isolates us in our most vulnerable moments. Let me tell you about a man we'll call David. To the outside world, David was the American dream personified. He was a partner at a prestigious law firm in Chicago, a marathon runner, had a beautiful wife, 2 kids in private school, and a corner office with a view of Lake Michigan. He was the guy his friends went to for advice. He was the rock, the one who had it all figured out. When he walked into a room, he commanded respect. He was confident, articulate, and always in control. But what nobody saw were the mornings David would sit in his car in the parking garage, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, his heart hammering against his ribs, absolutely convinced that this was the day everyone would find out he was a fraud. He was drowning in what we call high-functioning anxiety and depression. He met every deadline, he won his cases, he smiled at every parent-teacher conference. But internally, he was in a constant state of war. A voice in his head told him his success was a fluke, that his happiness was a performance, and that one wrong move would cause the entire elaborate structure of his life to shatter into a million pieces. He couldn't enjoy his victories because he was already terrified of the next challenge. He couldn't connect with his family because he was trapped in a vortex of his own anxious thoughts. He felt a profound sense of emptiness, a grayscale numbness that no amount of success or material comfort could color in. And the worst part? He felt an overwhelming sense of guilt. He would look at his life, a life so many people would kill for, and ask himself, what right do I have to feel this way? I have everything. To admit I'm struggling feels like the ultimate act of selfishness, of ungratefulness. So he pushed it down. He worked harder, ran longer, and perfected his mask of calm capability. He believed the lie. He believed that men like him, men at the top of their game, didn't get depressed. That was for other people. His breakdown didn't happen in a single dramatic moment. It was a slow, quiet erosion. It was snapping at his kids for no reason. It was staring at a legal brief for an hour, unable to process the words. It was the moment his wife found him crying in the pantry late one night, and he finally confessed in a choked whisper, I don't know how to keep doing this. David's story isn't unique. It is the hidden story of millions. Mental illness does not check your bank account, doesn't look at your resume. It doesn't care if you're the CEO or the janitor, a celebrated artist or a stay-at-home parent. The brain is an organ. It is a complex piece of biological machinery. And just like a star athlete can have a heart condition, a brilliant leader can have a chemical imbalance. Think about the archetype of the class clown, the person in every friend group who is always on, always ready with a joke, always lifting everyone else's spirits. We assume they are naturally buoyant, that their default state is joy. But so often that relentless humor is a defense mechanism, a shield built to keep their own darkness at bay. The tragic story of Robin Williams is perhaps the most powerful public example of this. A man who brought immeasurable laughter to the world was fighting a profound and painful battle internally. His genius for comedy and his struggle with severe depression were not mutually exclusive. They existed inside the same brilliant, complex human being. We assumed that someone who could create so much light couldn't possibly be living in so much darkness. We were wrong. Or consider the returning veteran. We see them as symbols of strength, discipline, and courage. They have faced horrors most of us can't even imagine and have come back. Society expects them to be stoic, to be resilient, to be unshakable. But PTSD, depression, and anxiety are rampant among the veteran community. Their training taught them to suppress fear and pain to survive on the battlefield. But that same training can make it nearly impossible to process trauma back home. The very strength we admire becomes a cage, preventing them from admitting they are haunted by what they've seen and done. They don't fit our stereotype of a mentally ill person, so their suffering often goes unseen and untreated until it reaches a crisis point. The National Institute of Mental Health is very clear on this. Mental illnesses are common in the United States. In any given year, nearly 1 in 5 U.S. adults live with a mental illness. That's over 50 million people. Look around you. Look at your friends, your family, your coworkers. Statistically, you know many people who are fighting a silent battle. And these numbers cut across every imaginable demographic. They are not concentrated in one area, one income bracket, one race, or one gender. Anxiety is an equal opportunity employer. Depression doesn't discriminate. The danger of believing this misconception is that it creates a world where we only offer help to those who look like they need it. We fail to check in on our most successful friends. We laugh with the comedian but never ask how they're really doing. We thank the soldier for their service but don't create a space for them to talk about their pain. We create a culture of silence where people like David, the successful lawyer, suffer alone because they believe their struggle is a personal failure, not a medical condition. The truth is, you can have a PhD and have OCD. You can be a world-class athlete and have a panic disorder. You can be the most loving mother in the world and have postpartum depression. These are not contradictions. They are complexities. They are human. The facade of a person's life is not a reliable indicator of their internal reality. The curated perfection we see on social media and even in our daily interactions is often just that, a curation. It's a highlight reel. The real, raw, and often difficult footage is left on the cutting room floor. Breaking down this misconception requires a fundamental shift in our perception. It requires us to understand that vulnerability is not tied to circumstance. It is the default setting of the human condition. We are all, every single one of us, susceptible. And recognizing this fact isn't pessimistic. It's the very foundation of compassion. It allows us to look at the person who seems to have it all and wonder with genuine care how they might be struggling. It allows us to look at ourselves, in our own moments of darkness, and know that we are not alone and we are not broken. We are simply human, navigating the beautiful, and sometimes brutal complexity of being alive. And when that navigation gets too tough, when the currents are too strong and the fog is too thick, what tools do we reach for? For millions of Americans, one of those tools is medication. And that brings us to misconception number 9. The belief that taking medication for your mental health is a crutch. An easy way out. A sign that you're not trying hard enough, that you're just not strong enough to handle it on your own. This is one of the most insidious and damaging myths out there, because it doesn't just misunderstand the nature of mental illness. It actively shames people for seeking one of the most effective forms of help available. It's a myth that thrives on a uniquely American brand of rugged individualism, the idea that we should be able to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, even when our boots and our brains are stuck in concrete. Let me tell you about a guy we'll call David. David was the epitome of that mindset. A successful architect, marathon runner, a guy who believed that any problem could be solved with enough discipline, enough grit, enough early mornings and cold showers. When a deep, suffocating depression began to settle over him in his late 30s, he treated it like any other challenge. He would outwork it. He doubled down on his running. He cleaned up his diet until it was pristine. He read self-help books, he meditated, he journaled. He forced himself to socialize even when every cell in his body screamed at him to stay in bed. He was doing everything right. But he kept getting worse. The fog in his mind grew thicker, making complex architectural designs feel like impossible calculus. The joy he used to get from a long run evaporated, replaced by a grueling, joyless slog. He would sit in meetings smiling and nodding, while a relentless internal monologue told him he was a fraud, a failure, that everyone could see right through him. He was at war with his own mind, and despite his discipline, despite his grit, he was losing. His wife finally convinced him to see a therapist. He went reluctantly, feeling like it was an admission of defeat. His therapist was a brilliant, compassionate woman who, after several sessions, gently suggested he consider an antidepressant. David's reaction was visceral. He felt insulted. A pill? That was for weak people. That was cheating. He told her, "I don't want to be numb. I don't want a chemical personality. I just need to try harder." His therapist listened patiently, and then she asked him a question that would change his life. She said, "David, you're an architect. If you were building a skyscraper, and you discovered the chemical composition of the steel being delivered for the foundation was fundamentally flawed, that it was missing key alloys that gave it strength, what would you do? Would you tell the construction crew to just try harder to make it stand? Would you tell them to have a more positive attitude about the faulty steel? Or would you correct the chemical imbalance in the steel, so that the building could have a chance to stand tall and strong?" He was silent. For the first time, someone had spoken to him in a language he understood. He wasn't being asked to take a happy pill. He was being asked to correct a foundational biological imbalance. This is the core of what this misconception gets so wrong. For a huge number of people, conditions like major depression, anxiety disorders, or bipolar disorder aren't just a matter of circumstance or mindset. They are physiological, neurological conditions. We're talking about neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine not being produced, released, or reabsorbed correctly. It's a chemical and electrical signaling problem in the most complex organ in the known universe. You cannot will your brain to produce more serotonin, any more than a diabetic can will their pancreas to produce more insulin. You cannot outthink a faulty neural circuit any more than you can outthink a heart arrhythmia. To call medication a crutch is a profound misunderstanding of what a crutch even is. Think about it. What does a crutch do? When you break your leg, a crutch is a tool that allows you to function while your body heals. It supports your weight, it provides stability, it prevents you from doing further damage. It allows you to get out of bed, to go to work, to live your life while the deep internal work of mending bone takes place. The medication is the crutch. It doesn't heal the bone itself. It creates the necessary conditions for healing to begin. For so many people like David, depression and anxiety aren't just sadness or worry. They are a constant, deafening static. A cognitive noise so loud that it's impossible to think clearly. It's impossible to engage with therapy in a meaningful way. It's impossible to use the coping strategies you're learning when your brain is screaming at you that nothing matters. The medication, when it works, doesn't create happiness out of thin air. It turns down the static. It quiets the noise. It gives you the mental and emotional bandwidth to actually show up for your own life and do the hard work of healing. It lifts the 300-pound weight off your chest just enough so that you can finally take a full breath, stand up, and start walking toward the therapist's office. David, after that conversation with his therapist, decided to try it. It wasn't a magic bullet. The first medication he tried had side effects he couldn't tolerate. The second one took 6 long weeks to kick in. It was a frustrating, non-linear process. But one morning, about 2 months in, he woke up and the first thought in his head wasn't one of dread. He noticed the color of the sunrise. He could taste his coffee. The static had receded. It was still there, faintly in the background, but it no longer dominated his entire reality. With that newfound clarity, he dove back into therapy. This time the lessons stuck. He could identify his negative thought patterns without being consumed by them. He could practice mindfulness. He started rebuilding the connections with his wife and kids that the depression had eroded. The medication didn't solve his problems. It gave him the stability and clarity to face his problems. It was the corrected steel in his foundation, allowing him to finally start building again. Is medication the answer for everyone? Absolutely not. For some, therapy alone is the key. For others, lifestyle changes can be enough. And for some, medication is a necessary life-saving tool, often in combination with therapy. It is not the easy way out. It's one of the hardest things in the world to admit you need help on a biological level. It takes courage to engage in the trial and error process of finding what works. It takes strength to push past the social stigma and the internal voice telling you you're weak for needing it. Choosing to use a scientifically proven tool to manage a documented medical condition isn't cheating. It's not taking a shortcut. It is, in fact, one of the bravest things a person can do. It's an admission that you can't do it alone, and a declaration that you are willing to do whatever it takes to get better. It's choosing to fight with every tool in the arsenal. And that brings us to the final and perhaps most damaging misconception of all. Misconception number 10. That a mental health condition is a sign of weakness. A character flaw. A moral failing. This is the one. This is the misconception that poisons the well. It's the insidious whisper in the back of your mind that keeps you silent, isolated, and ashamed. It's the cultural bedrock of stigma in a nation built on the myth of the rugged individual, the person who can pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, no matter what. We are taught from a young age that to need help is to be less than, that to struggle with your own mind is a private failure you should hide at all costs. But let's be brutally honest for a moment. If you broke your femur, would anyone call you weak for needing a cast and crutches? If your pancreas stopped producing insulin correctly, would you be accused of having a character flaw? If you were diagnosed with cancer, would you be told to just think your way out of it? Of course not. The idea is absurd. We would offer support, we would cook meals, we would drive you to doctor's appointments. We would see it for what it is, a medical condition. So why do we treat the brain differently? The single most complex organ in the known universe. this 3-pound marvel of electricity and chemistry that governs every single thought, every emotion, every action you take. The brain can get sick just like a lung, a heart, or a kidney. Genetics can predispose you to certain conditions. Traumatic events can physically alter its structure and chemistry. Chronic stress can wear down its defenses. This isn't about willpower. You cannot will your serotonin levels to be higher any more than you can will a broken bone to fuse back together instantly. To suggest otherwise isn't just ignorant, it's cruel. The truth is, living with a mental health condition doesn't require less strength. It requires more. It demands a level of resilience and courage that people who have never experienced it can barely comprehend. Let me tell you about a man we'll call David. To the outside world, David was the definition of success. A high-powered attorney in a major city, beautiful family, corner office with a view. He was tough, sharp, relentless in the courtroom. He was the guy who worked 80-hour weeks and still ran marathons on the weekend. He was the embodiment of the American dream, the man who had pulled himself up by his bootstraps. But inside, David was drowning. He was living with severe, high-functioning depression and generalized anxiety disorder. Every morning was a monumental battle just to get out of bed. The face he showed the world was a carefully constructed mask, and holding it in place took every ounce of energy he had. He described it as a constant, low-grade hum of dread, punctuated by waves of pure panic that would hit him in his office, in his car, in the middle of a deposition. He felt like an imposter, a fraud. He believed his struggle was a secret, shameful defect, a sign that he wasn't as strong as everyone thought he was. He was the tough guy, the problem solver. He couldn't admit that the problem was inside his own head, so he pushed harder, worked longer hours, drank more at night to quiet the noise. He isolated himself from his family, not because he didn't love them, but because he didn't want them to see the cracks in his armor. He was terrified that if they saw the real him, the weak him, they would be disgusted. His breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon. He was in a high-stakes negotiation, the kind he used to thrive on. But this time he couldn't focus. The words coming out of the other lawyer's mouth sounded like they were coming from underwater. The hum of dread in his chest grew into a roar. His heart started pounding, his vision tunneled. He thought he was having a heart attack. He excused himself, stumbled into a bathroom stall, and completely fell apart. He sat on the cold tile floor of a corporate high-rise, a man who commanded million-dollar deals, and wept uncontrollably, unable to breathe, convinced he was dying or losing his mind. That was the moment the mask shattered. He could no longer pretend. That night, shaking and terrified, he finally told his wife everything. He didn't tell her because he was strong. He told her because he had no strength left. He had finally hit bottom. And what she said changed his life. She didn't call him weak. She didn't recoil in disgust. She took his hand and said, "My God, David, I had no idea you were carrying all of this. You haven't been weak. You've been trying to fight a war all by yourself. You are the strongest person I know." In that moment, the narrative in his head began to shift. Seeking help wasn't his final failure. It was his first real act of courage. Going to therapy was harder than any courtroom battle he'd ever fought. Admitting he needed medication felt like a surrender. But he soon realized it wasn't a crutch. It was a lifeline. It was the cast on his broken leg, allowing him to finally start healing. David learned that his depression wasn't a character flaw. It was a chemical imbalance exacerbated by years of unrelenting stress. His anxiety wasn't a sign of cowardice. It was his brain's threat detection system stuck in overdrive. He learned that true strength isn't the absence of struggle. It's the willingness to face it. Think about it. What is true strength? Is it pretending you're not in pain? Or is it admitting you're hurt and taking the steps to heal? Is it bottling up every fear and insecurity? Or is it having the courage to be vulnerable and ask for help? The strongest people on this planet are not the ones who never fall. They are the ones who get up, day after day, fighting invisible battles that no one else can see. They are the ones who make the call to a therapist despite crippling social anxiety. They are the ones who drag themselves out of bed when depression is screaming at them to stay down. They are the ones who face their trauma in a therapist's office week after week, reliving their worst moments in order to reclaim their future. That is not weakness. That is the heart of a warrior. So if you are watching this right now and you are struggling and that voice in your head is telling you that you are weak, that you are broken, that you are a failure, I want you to tell that voice to shut up. You are not weak. You are a survivor. You are carrying a weight that most people cannot imagine. The very fact that you are still here, still breathing, still fighting, is a testament to a strength you are not giving yourself credit for. Your illness is not your identity. Your struggle is not your shame. It is part of your story, and it has forged a resilience within you that is unbreakable. To seek help is not to give up. It is to finally give yourself a fighting chance. It is the ultimate act of self-respect. It's saying, I am worth saving. My life is worth fighting for. Let's destroy this misconception right here, right now. Let's redefine strength. Strength is honesty. Strength is vulnerability. Strength is picking up the phone and dialing 988 when you feel like you can't go on. Strength is telling a friend, I'm not okay. Strength is showing up for yourself, especially on the days you don't feel like it. Mental illness isn't a choice, but recovery is. It's a series of choices you make every single day. The choice to take your medication. The choice to go to your appointment. The choice to use the coping skills you've learned. The choice to be kind to yourself when you have a setback. These are not the choices of a weak person. These are the choices of a hero. Your hero's journey doesn't have to be a secret. By sharing our stories, by speaking our truth, we dismantle the stigma brick by brick. We show the world that mental health is just health, and that taking care of our minds is the strongest, bravest thing we can possibly do. You are not flawed. You are fighting. And that fight doesn't make you weak. It makes you a force to be reckoned with.